Hello, everybody. My name is Damien. You're going to hear a little bit more from me later, but I am not the star of today's show. The star of today's show is Laura, and you guys are in for a treat because she is an expert. Hopefully, we're all in the right place. You can see the title up on the screen, but if you're not, today we're going to be talking about using digital portfolios to support the documentation of knowledge. And then I added in a little line at the end because we're all preparing for a hybrid learning environment this fall. So touch a little bit on that in terms of anytime, anywhere learning as well as we're going through. Again, hopefully everyone here is familiar with EdWeb. You're going to want to be a member, so make sure to join up. EdWeb, that's where you'll be able to take the continuing education quiz, all the amazing things that EdWeb offers. I'm assuming for most of you, for 99% of you, the name Spaces, the name My Blueprint will be foreign to you. And that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the very end of this. This is a brand new product that we're excited to introduce to schools across North America. And because it's a new product for us, we actually have a pretty exciting launch year giveaway specifically for members or for people who are attending this EdWeb webinar, whether you're attending live or watching the recording. So do me a favor, stick around for a few minutes at the end of this so you guys can see what that is all about and who we are all about at My Blueprint. But in short, Spaces is a student-driven digital portfolio built for 2020. Right? So we'll talk a bit more about what that means a little bit later. And now is my opportunity to introduce you to Laura. You guys are welcome to read the words on the screen right now, but I like to speak from the heart. Laura is quickly becoming one of my favorite people within a school. Aside from my grade 3 teacher, Miss Brankston, she'll always remain at the top of the list. Laura is right there with her. She's a wonderful human being. She's a wonderful educator. She has a lot of experience. She's kind of blazing a trail in this field right now. So you guys are all really in for a treat with this. I want to stop talking because she's the reason you guys are here today. So I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to hide my camera. I'm going to pass it over to Laura. Again, take advantage of the Q&A, the questions. We'll come back to them later. Grab a coffee, grab a water, and let's give it to Laura.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Damien. That was really kind of you. Hi, everyone. As Damien said, my name is Laura Hayes, and I want to thank you first and foremost for joining me here today on your summer holiday. I love to be surrounded by lifelong learners, and it's a pleasure to share my passion with you today, which is using how we use digital portfolios to support the documentation of knowledge within a model of anytime, anywhere learning. And I know that certainly as we're heading into September with all of this uncertainty around us, we really do need to find a way to ensure that we are continuing to assess our students formatively and effectively, regardless of where they are physically, because there's just a lot of uncertainty about whether they'll be in our classrooms or in their homes. And so I'm really excited to explore this topic with you today. But before I do, I'd love to share just a little bit about myself with you. So as I said, or as Damien said, we're coming to you today from Canada. I am a primary junior teacher here in Canada. What that means is that I am able to teach from kindergarten to grade 6. I have additional qualifications in special education and kindergarten, and my degree is in child and youth studies. And I've recently started doing a little bit of consulting outside of that. I'd love you to know right up front that the bulk of my experience has been in the early years, and it's only been recently that I've started to explore outside of that grade level, and that's been really neat for me, and I'll speak about that in just a minute. But I started my career in the public board in Canada and before moving overseas to the Canadian International School in Singapore. It was there that I was trained as an IB teacher. So if you're familiar with the IB, it's the International Baccalaureate organization. And what they do, it's a model of teaching that's inquiry based. There's a lot of constructivism in it, and we're going to speak about that in just a little bit. So I was teaching kindergarten overseas. I returned back to Canada and found myself teaching kindergarten again at a very, very large all-boys school in Toronto. And it was at that time where I spent a good number of years, and I really started to refine my understanding of documentation and how to use portfolios, and in particular took an interest in the digital portfolio. And so I spent many wonderful years there developing those skills in myself. And then just recently, actually, I have made what feels like an entire change in career, because I left this giant all boys school to teaching kindergarten to move to a very small but no less spectacular all girls school. And I took a position as a grade 5 teacher. And when I did that, I knew it was the right step for me. It was time to explore more in teaching and other avenues. But I was really worried about where my passion for documentation and portfolio assessment might fall at that time. And what I was really pleased to see was that, in fact, these tools that are primarily used in the early years, they actually do transcend the early years. They can and they should be being used across all grade levels. And so that's what brings me here to you today. It's what brought me to Damien, and what brings me to you. And so I'm really excited to get into this with you. So let's have a look at what our topics of discussion will be today. We're going to start just by looking at what 21st century learning is and talk a little bit about how we assess 21st century learners. We'll look then at what is a portfolio and how we can marry the portfolio with pedagogical documentation to enrich our assessment. Now, if these terms are new to you, that's fantastic. You're in exactly the right place, because in just the short time that we have together today, I can do not much more than skim the surface of them. So this is a wonderful introduction for you. And and my hope is that you leave this session and I have ignited a spark in you to learn more and to continue your professional development in this way. And please feel free to reach out to me if I can support you in any way with that. If you are somebody who is proficient already in portfolio assessment and pedagogical documentation, you are also in the right place, because my hope here is that I inspire you to be an agent of change in your school and to take these tools that are more often used down in our early years and primary years and start to be an advocate to see them used effectively across all grade levels in your school. So, because of that, the next piece that we will discuss in our discussion will be how we can use portfolios and pedagogical documentation across all grade levels. And finally, we'll look specifically at the digital portfolio and how it specifically can showcase growth across all environments, regardless as to whether we are at home or at school, which is so important as we're moving into this year of the pandemic. So let's get started then by taking a look at 21st century skills. Okay. So as I said, I'm coming to you from Canada. So I'm going to start with a really brief overview of a Canadian research study by the RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. But I really feel that it's relevant to most countries. I think you'll find it quite relatable. So the RBC did a year-long research project crossing the entire country of Canada, talking to educators, policymakers, employers of all sectors. And they were looking at the skills that were being used in these areas. And the results were quite dismal, actually. They announced that we are in what they called a quiet crisis. Okay. And essentially what they mean is that they were finding that students were not coming out of school equipped with the skills that they need in order to be successful for this job, for the occupations and careers that are expected to come in the next few years in the 21st century. And so it is a huge study. It is fascinating. And I strongly recommend that you read it. It is in the credits here. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go into all of the details, but that's the gist of it there. Now, what they did was they offered this graph with the projected skills demand for all occupations. Okay, so if we look on the left side of the graph, we see these are the skills that are projected as most in demand for all occupations in the 21st century. Okay, and then it declines from there. So if you look on the left side of the graph, it's hard to read there. I know it's small and I apologize, but I'll pull out some of the ones that are really would speak to us as teachers. So things like active listening, critical thinking, social perceptiveness, judgment and decision making, complex problem solving, right? These really big skills, and they're in high demand. And notably as well, this is just sort of an aside, but the study found that judgment and decision making, as well as as well as social perceptiveness, is are going to be critical for essentially every occupation. So these skills, we need our students to have them. So what I'm hoping that perhaps some of you are making a connection right now to these 21st century skills. I hope your teacher brain might be jumping over to Bloom's taxonomy, okay? If you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy was created by an American educational psychologist in, I think it was 1956. And it's a way that we classify human cognition, like levels of cognition. So the most basic level of thinking is when we're remembering, and then understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating, right? So if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, we see that the majority of those skills that were on the left side of the graph are up there in the top of Bloom's taxonomy, right? The analyzing, evaluating, creating. Okay, so for example, right, you can't solve a problem if you don't know how to analyze the problem, evaluate the pros and cons of different routes of decision or different methods of solving the problem, and then create the actual plan of action, right? You can't do that if you're not up in the top tiers of Bloom's taxonomy. So what does it mean in teacher talk then? So what is it that I'm trying to say to you? When we're thinking about those 21st century skills in teacher talk, we want to be thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, because if we ensure that when we are teaching our students, we have them reaching up into those top 3 tiers of Bloom's, right? Analyzing, evaluating, creating, then we can feel confident that we are providing opportunity for our students to be developing those skills that they are certainly going to need in the 21st century, because those 3 top tiers are where those 21st century skills lay. Okay? And so that is why education is changing. That's the very reason why. Okay, we're no longer being asked to have our students sit in rows and desks, right, while we lecture to them. Well, as an aside, unfortunately, it's quite possible that this year, in the year of COVID, we may be asked to do this, but we understand that this isn't best practice anymore. So in our ideal COVID-free world, we are no longer lecturing to our students, because we understand that this would put them at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, right? They're just remembering the information that we have given them, right? They're not engaging in analysis, evaluation, or creation. And so that's the reason why education is changing. So how is it changing? It's moving into a more constructivist approach, right? So what we have is students who are engaging in experiential and collaborative learning. So it's coming from, if you go back to your psych ed classes in Teachers College, Jean Piaget's cognitive constructivism, Lev Vygotsky's social constructivism, right? Jean Piaget saying, okay, that we're learning by doing, right? By engaging in something, and we're constructing that knowledge ourselves. Lev Vygotsky saying, yes, well, no, we're learning because we're engaging in dialogue and discussion and reflection with in a social context, right? And I love this quote that says that these are not mutually exclusive. So as learners who are part of a society, we can acquire knowledge through either channel. But as a teacher, I would take that a step further, and I would say we can be acquiring knowledge through either channel simultaneously. And that's the reason why we know that when we put our students in small groups together and they're engaged in hands-on activities, that they are both constructing that knowledge cognitively via Jean Piaget and also engaged in the social piece of constructivism via Lev Vygotsky. Okay, so that's wonderful, right? But this is really a shift, right? Because in the past we had students in desks and we were assessing them. We knew what we were assessing as we were looking for it. They were doing as we asked them to do. But now it's a bit more spontaneous, right? Because they're engaged in these small groups and they're hands-on, and we're looking at skills rather than content. It's not a yes or no answer. It's a skill. So how do we assess these skills as they're happening? So before we go there, I just want to ask you to consider something for a minute, okay? When you're assessing a 21st century skill, which form of assessment do you think should hold the greatest weight? Do you think it's assessment as learning, which would be our self-assessment, assessment for learning, so our formative assessment, or our assessment of learning, our summative assessment? Oh, so many interesting answers. Okay, so here's what I'll say. When we assess summatively, right, we're suggesting that something is done, right? When we assess, it's an event that has a start and an end in a summative sense, right? So we come on in, here's your test, sit down, you're going to do this test, it starts here, it ends there, show me what you've got in this time period, right? But if you think about a skill doesn't really have a start and an end, right? Because it's not as if we say, okay, in grade 2, we do analyzing. Then we're done, right? Analyzing starts at birth and carries on forever. It's really ongoing. And so really the strongest form of assessment for something that is ongoing would be the assessment that is ongoing. So I would suggest that it would be the formative assessment. I did see plenty of self-assessments coming up there as well, and I definitely agree, and we will come to that in just a few slides there, okay? But there's always more to assess when we're looking at a skill, right? And so it's not something that we can capture in a single time, in a single place, in a single event. Okay? And that is why the formative assessment is such a strong tool. Now, this is where the portfolio comes into play as an amazing tool for demonstrating student growth over time and place. Okay, so the goal of a portfolio is to make learning visible. Okay, that's the goal of it. And what the portfolio is a collection of evidence of student work or student learning. So traditionally, that has been, a binder with pieces of paper, usually maybe some photographs included in it, and it should always include the reflection. And that's where that assessment as learning comes in that I said we'll speak to shortly. Okay. Now, this is just my own experience, but what I've experienced and and personally experienced as well is a decline in the use of the portfolio. And my feeling is that is because it is something that is tedious. As a paper pencil thing to do, it's tedious. And it felt very much like it was something that another thing that was put on teachers that we need to do because yes, it's best practice, but nothing was taken away, just another thing that you need to find some time in the day to do and get it done, right? And so in that sense, it was very much like a noun. Hear me out, because, and I know we've all been here for this one, right? 3 days before student-led conferences comes along and you're in your classroom and it's, okay, clear the schedule. We have to work on our portfolios today. I need you to make sure you have 3 pieces of language, 3 pieces of reading, 3 pieces of writing, 3 pieces of math in there. And oh my gosh, don't forget to do the reflection on those. You've got 10 minutes. Let's get it done. Come on, right? And so the reflections were weak, and it was very much, like I said, like a noun, right? Something that needed to be created by this date for this purpose. But in fact, that is not at all what the portfolio was meant to be in its creation, right? The portfolio is meant to be much more of a verb, right? Something that is ongoing. It's a living document, and in fact should be able to be opened at any point in time, and be just as valuable a tool as if it was the big day of the student-led conference or whatnot, right? And so that's really where for me, I see the decline happening there in terms of the use of it. And so before we move forward with that, I just want to pause for a minute and say, okay, I've talked about how tedious it was, but let's not forget, though, the reason the portfolio has come into play. It's come into play because it's a fantastic tool. There are incredible benefits to the portfolio that perhaps when it was introduced to teachers and piled on top of us, we didn't recognize, weren't explained, and we didn't learn how to make the most of, okay? So first and foremost, in the process of building a portfolio, our students are developing insight. What does that mean? That means that they are learning to use success criteria to evaluate their learning against their goals, right? So they're developing insight into how to be successful. Self-regulation, right? They're learning to monitor their own learning, which means, they're developing their executive function, their working memory, flexible thinking, self-control. I just saw metacognition pop up there, someone. Yes, their metacognition, okay? They are gaining an understanding of how they best learn. Each time they put something into the portfolio, they're thinking, why is this piece going in the portfolio? Why now, right? What is the reason I'm putting this in? What does it say about me as a learner? Because not everything is supposed to go in the portfolio. There's supposed to be carefully selected things that are in there for a purpose, right? So intentional and purposeful. Absolutely. I saw goal setting pop up there. Yep, they're goal setting, right? They're assessing them. Self-assessment is happening there as well, right? And then here's the big ta-da moment. The very act of building the portfolio ensures that our students are working in the top 3 tiers of Bloom's taxonomy. So when you have your students building a portfolio, you are providing them with the opportunity to develop those 21st century skills. And I love this quote that comes from this book, which I believe Damien's going to be giving away at the end of today's session, okay, by Davies, Herbst, and Augusta. When students are actively involved in creating their portfolios or collections of evidence, the process itself allows them to live the verbs of the curricular standards and outcomes. Yes, that's how it's supposed to be. Okay, so now going back to the downfalls of the portfolio, yes, it's the time that it takes to do it. But as I said, this isn't actually something that's supposed to be on top of the things that you're doing. This is supposed to replace the less meaningful things that you're doing, right? This is meant to replace other ways that we have been trying to develop skills, or perhaps placing too much emphasis on the content, which we know our students are going to be able to Google, right? We're moving away from a focus on content and moving more into the skills, right? And so what I say to you is, we don't have time to go into this in today's session, but what you need to do as you're thinking about September and as you're thinking about implementing portfolios in your classroom is you need to look at, how am I going to implement this so that it is routine in my classroom, so that there is time in the day for students to engage in the development of their portfolio in a way that is organic and natural and doesn't feel like it's taking away, right? So, and because we're recognizing and valuing the process that is developing the 21st century skills of our students as they're developing the portfolio. Okay. All right. So let's imagine for a minute that we have created this beautiful portfolio. Okay, so the traditional portfolio, paper pencil portfolio. And in it, we've got some beautiful images of artwork, some math examples, some written examples. And here's the thing. Most often, as I mentioned, the first thing to go as a result of time with a portfolio is the reflection. Okay, so some people mentioned earlier, and when I asked about which form of assessment is most important, down the side of my screen, I was seeing self-assessment. Yes. Okay. The reflection piece is so important. And unfortunately, it's the first thing to go, either in that it's not there, or, and this is more likely, that it's not rich, right? It's not a meaningful reflection. Okay. And so here's what I want to ask you. If you have something in a portfolio and it's just an image or just a piece of math or just a piece of writing, where's the student's voice in that image? So indulge me for a minute here. Okay. I want to imagine, instead of opening this beautiful portfolio that's been curated with beautiful pieces of work of art, okay, I want to imagine that we're walking into an art museum and we're seeing this piece of art. Okay, now let's pretend for a minute that you're me, and we're going to say I'm person A, and true story, I don't know anything about visual arts. So everybody out there who can immediately recognize this piece of art, wonderful. Props to you. I don't see anything in it. Okay. So to me, if I were person A and I'm walking into this art museum and I see this, I'm going to get a very kindergarten-like reaction in sense of it's either going to be, I like it or I don't like it. I see a violin. I see a crystal ball. I see a glass overturned. That's what I see from this image. Okay, with no voice to it. Okay, now let's imagine that person B walks in. Okay, and person B has some knowledge in art. Okay, so this is maybe somebody who has some training in art, someone who has experience or background in art, but there's something to offer. They have a voice to offer on this. Okay, and so they recognize that this is a vanitas. Okay, and I had to Google this, so I hope it's right. That it's a still life piece of work that's meant to represent the fleetingness of life and certainty of death. Okay, and they know, because of their experience and their training and their background, they know what to look for. Exactly what to look for. And so they can find those items and they can create, interpret, and analyze the piece of work, recognizing what the artist perhaps was trying to say, and also recognize the skills and talent of the artist. Okay, so person A and person B's experience, our interpretations are very different, right? Because it's about our experience with the art in general. But if person B has extensive experience in the subject, they're even going to be able to take it a step further and provide a really deep analysis of it, right? So I'm not going to read this to you, okay, but I'll just pick a little part of it, right? The pocket watch is facing away from us and has its back open, as if someone had tried to fathom the mysterious nature of time. So as person A, I didn't even notice the pocket watch, let alone notice that it was facing back, nor could I have interpreted it in that way, right? This is because of person B's experience with art, that they would know to look for these things or to analyze in this way again, okay? Now, let's imagine, though, that person C enters the museum. And we've got person C here, who is the artist himself. And person C is there to talk about what he did, how he did it, and why he did it that way. Okay. This person may be able to engage in a dialogue with person B and be able to extend his own thinking through the conversation with person B, because person B may ask questions that provoke the thinking of person C, of the artist, right? But also, person C may be able to bring to the attention of person B something like, I'm just going to bring us back here, have a look at that crystal ball. What you notice in the reflection of the crystal ball, that is the artist's reflection there. Okay. In fact, the artist chose not to sign his signature on this because his reflection is there. So that is his stamp on it, right? Now, person B didn't know to look for that because it's not part of his training or her training, right? Or experience. This is something that is unique to the voice of person C, right? Unique to the voice of person C, of the artist. And so here's a question without an answer, although I hope that your question is not person A. But who do you think you would learn the most from about the work, right? Who do you think it would be? Guys, I'm seeing all kinds of C's. Yeah, that was my go-to too as well. But here's what I want to say. And this is where the early years teacher in me comes in, okay? Don't underestimate the voice of person B. Okay, and this is where documentation, pedagogical documentation really comes in, okay? In the early years, teachers use something called noticing and naming, okay? And what that means is that they notice something that a child is doing and they identify what that is for the child. So for example, let's say I have a child who is playing with some colored gems and she creates a beautiful flower with those gems. And she's unaware that she's created a pattern, right? Because she has yet to explore patterning. So the teacher's going to notice what she's doing. Oh, Georgia, I noticed that you've created a beautiful flower, and I noticed you've arranged the gems in an order that repeats. I can read that as A, B, C, A, B, C. I'm noticing and I'm naming the pattern for the student. Okay, so something that they didn't know they were doing, and I have provoked to push the next step. Okay, and this is where I argue that that role of the teacher and that role that can come from documentation by including a teacher reflection and a teacher analysis as well, regardless of the grade level, whether you're in kindergarten or whether you're in grade 12, is there in order to push our students out of their comfort zone while they're working in their zone of proximal development, to push them to their next step of learning. Okay, so yes, person C, clearly you would want to have with you, but person B, with the training, with the experience, with the knowledge as well, is equally important. And that partnership is what makes the image of the learner really clear and wholesome. And so the whole point of that analogy really was to highlight the point that if you have a portfolio without a reflection, the learning is left open to interpretation and we miss an invaluable opportunity for learning. Right? So if you're assuming that person A is the one looking at the portfolio, person A who has no training or knowledge, right? And is not the artist, they're missing that opportunity to learn more about that student as a learner and their goals in learning, right? So it really is the partnership between the teacher and student. However, when we're talking about across all grade levels, this is the part where we have to recognize that it's not going to look the same across grade levels. And while that seems really obvious to say, it tends to be in actuality that we use it as a reason to brush things off, Okay, so reflection in kindergarten is going to look very, very different than reflection in grade 12 because the skill set is so entirely different. Reflection in kindergarten is going to have a very heavy teacher presence, right? Because the students don't have that skill set yet. Reflection in grade 12, if, and here's the if we have carefully scaffolded the development of those skills, those reflective skills and those 21st century skills up until grade 12, this voice should be more that of person C, of the person who has created the work of art. And person B, the teacher, takes the role of the noticing and naming and provoking and pushing that student forward. Okay? And so it's really just about opening your mind to what documentation portfolio assessment would look like at the age and stage of the student that you're working with. Okay, it's a gradual release of responsibility from teacher to student. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pedagogical documentation then. Okay, documentation is the practice of observing and recording, sharing things that we've observed in media. Okay, and the reason is that we're trying to deepen and extend the learning. Now, it's best known coming out of an approach, although I use that term lightly, called Reggio Emilia, which came out of Italy, of the town of the same name, Reggio Emilia, founded by Loris Malaguzzi. Okay, and pedagogical documentation is best associated with the early years for this reason. Reggio Emilia is an approach that is primarily used in the early years. Okay, but there is a difference between documentation and pedagogical documentation. Pedagogical documentation occurs when we provide that analysis piece. Okay, when we take it that step further to try to really analyze and understand the meaning out of our observations. And that's where we're applying our knowledge, our professional knowledge, to better understand the child or the student. Okay, now, in a million years, we don't have time to get into Reggio today. But for anyone who's out there who is a huge Reggio fan, you know how magical and incredible this approach is. And I could argue 100 times over that every one of the principles of Reggio Emilia can extend across grade levels. And I would be happy to do that with or for anyone who has any interest. Please reach out to me. But today we're going to focus just on the documentation piece, okay? Because it certainly is one of the main principles of Reggio Emilia, and it's about listening, right? It's about listening to our students, regardless of the way in which they present their knowledge to us. And Loris Malaguzzi would say they have 100 ways to present their knowledge to us. It doesn't mean that it happens in a desk in a row on a piece of paper, right? They could share their knowledge with us through their words, through their song, through their structure, through their artwork, through their body language, right? There are 100 ways that they could do that, okay? So what I want more than anything for you to take away from this webinar is that if you open your mind to the idea that documentation can extend across grade levels, then you'll open your mind to the fact that documentation is already rooted in the portfolio. So it's when we're combining the documentation with the portfolio, it's really just about enriching the reflective piece in it, which is for the student, assessment as learning, and for the teacher, assessment for learning. Okay, so let's get down to it then. What on earth does documentation look like? Okay, here's an example of a piece of documentation that I did a few years back. Now, I want to preface this for all my very loyal Reggio friends out there to say that this was not a Reggio school. This is quite an academic school, and so certainly the analysis piece is not as rich as you would see in a true Reggio-inspired school. But all of the pieces are there, okay? So like Reggio, which is not a prescribed method, okay? Reggio is a philosophy that it has guiding principles. Like Reggio, documentation doesn't have a prescription to it either. Try as I might, and I'm very much a type A personality. I haven't been able to find a checklist of things you need to have in your documentation. And I believe that that's because it really is about the teacher's voice, the culture of the classroom, the culture of the school, and the students that she or he is working with. Okay. But there are a few things that I have found that do turn up in each piece of documentation. The first piece is an image of what's happening. Okay. And the reason for the image is that you need to have something for the student to reflect on. Now, especially in the early years where, and in this example, you'll see that we got cut short. Something happened that distracted the child. He was gone, and that rich moment of learning was lost. Okay. Now, the image provides an opportunity for me to revisit that with the student at a later time, and the image will cue his memory so that we can re-engage in that conversation, and I may be able to salvage some more information from it. Okay, so the image, there needs to be the voice of the child. In this case, the voice of the child is found in the transcription, okay, in the dialogue. But the voice of the child could be seen in a drawing. It could be seen in a image of a structure, right? It's really the work of the child that we're going to see here. And in this case, the work of the child came from the oral language piece, okay? And then there needs to be an analysis by the teacher, right? Or if we're moving up the ladder to the grade 12, this would be so much more the voice of the student, with the teacher acting as that person B from the museum, really provoking probing the conversation along. Okay. So here's and the other thing that I really like to include is a wonder or a next step. Okay. So I like to do that, and you'll see that in here. So here's what happened in this piece of documentation. I say, what do you see there that has you so excited, Liam? And Liam's pointing, and he says, it's that squiggly thing. Look, it's alive. And I said, really? Tell me more about that, Liam. And he said, it's moving, Miss Hayes. Look at it wiggling. It's moving, so it must be alive. It's moving. Look, there it goes, moving again. And I say, I see it. Oh, look at it go. You were right that it is alive. If it is alive, it must be getting all that it needs from the water. And Liam says, yeah, look, the water is clean. I can see the bottom. It looks so clean, only just a little bit of dirt. I think the water must be pretty clean for it to have a nice home there. And then I said, I wonder what might happen if the water was dirty. And Liam said, in true kindergarten style, oh, it for sure would get like poisoned dead. So our conversation got cut off there because one of the other boys found some droppings in the forest. So Liam was gone because animal poop is far more exciting than his conversation with the teacher. So it was cut off, but I have this image and I can draw him back to this conversation later. But here comes my analysis of the situation here, okay, of the learning. And I want you to notice that this is not a play-by-play of what was happening in the day. That's irrelevant, okay? I provide a small context just to cue my memory of what was happening, and then it's an analysis of Liam's learning and his showing me his skill development and content, curriculum content, okay? So Liam was, as part of our inquiry into living things, the boys were invited to observe water taken from the Credit River. Liam was particularly excited to find that there were living creatures in the sample. And in our conversation, Liam analyzed and evaluated his finding by applying his understanding of the characteristics of living things very thoughtfully. Liam uses the transparency of water to classify it as clean or dirty. I wonder how his thinking may change if he were invited to play with a microscope. So you can see I have the image, I have the student voice, I have the analysis, and I've used my professional knowledge to draw out the skills and the curriculum content that he demonstrated in that moment. All right, so there's a piece of documentation. Now, if you are a teacher of an older grade, okay, you're probably thinking, yeah, that's really great. But if I showed that to my administrator as my assessment, I would be laughed out of the room. Like, where is the accountability to the curriculum expectations or the provincial, regional expectations? Like, this is really lovely, but what am I supposed to do with this? Okay, sure. So what I tend to do then in a traditional paper pencil portfolio is I'll add in the curriculum expectations. Now, Reggio friends, I know you're thinking, what? But we have to remember that outside of a Reggio-inspired school or outside of an emergent curriculum, our colleagues are required to provide that accountability, right? They have a more rigorous program than we do. So here I add in my curriculum expectations and I include in also the analyzing and evaluating. Okay, right. So that covers that. But oh my gosh, this is still a giant, massive amount of work to do, right? And teachers are superheroes for countless numbers of reasons, but we really can't make there be more hours in a day. Okay, so here's what I say, okay, before I provide the answer for you. We have to, okay? Teaching is changing. We are preparing our students for the 21st century workforce. And we have to ensure that they are developing their skills, those 21st century skills, and that we are assessing those skills formatively, okay? We have to be able, especially as we head into this year, that we have to be ready and able to hear what they're telling us through whatever 100 languages that is, and we need to be ready to receive it, okay? No matter how hard that may be, okay? And this is where the digital portfolio comes in, okay? I know you've been waiting for it, but all of that information is necessary for us to understand the features of the digital portfolio and to understand just how important it is as a tool for both developing the skills and assessing the skills. Okay. Now, before I get into this piece, I do want to start with a little bit of fine print. And that is that, make no mistake about it, technology is a privilege. And I understand that there are people out there right now listening in the webinar who do not have access to technology. Okay. I hope that up until this point, I have provided enough information for you to convince you of the importance of keeping on with that traditional paper pencil portfolio. It is better than nothing. And the time that you put into it is worth it, right? Your students are developing the skills, right? And you are assessing those skills. Okay. So I encourage you to continue with it. And I applaud you for your persistence and determination with that. Okay. For those of us who are fortunate enough to have the technology in our classrooms to use a digital portfolio, I'm going to show you now how it can make you a superhero. And in fact, it doesn't take away from anything. In fact, it makes everything more efficient and makes the process of developing the portfolio even richer. Okay, so what I want you to know is that throughout here, I'm going to show you a few different portfolio options. There are a variety of digital portfolios out there. They do a variety of different things. They have a variety of different skins. Okay, so it's not a one size fit all. Some portfolios are geared for older grades. Some portfolios are clearly geared for younger ages. Your grade 12s probably don't want to use something that has a picture of a turtle as their avatar, right? So it really, you really need to do a little bit of work to determine which one is best suited for you. Okay, so let's start here. This is my Spaces, and I'm showing you just simply how on my Spaces and any digital portfolio, you can add an image and text. Okay, so here I've got my image of my two girls working on a project. It's hard to see, I know, but my analysis is there, and I have a transcription, okay, of the conversation that happened. Okay, so the neat thing about the digital portfolio right away is that the student or teacher or parent, and this is a really important point, when we think back to the museum, person B, I hope I lured you into believing person B was the teacher, but person B could very well be the parent as well. Who knows their child better than the parent? So their voice, their reflection is equally as important in the partnership of the portfolio. And so while it is most often an option to invite parents to join, I strongly suggest that you do, because you get a more wholesome, more comprehensive view of the student. Okay, so regardless as to who adds the original image, okay, the amazing thing about it is that with a digital portfolio, there can then be ongoing interaction. Okay, so if I add an image and I add my analysis, I can put a question in there to provoke more thinking, further reflection from the student. If the student adds the image, the student adds the analysis, and it's a bad reflection, I can go in and provoke the student to think more deeply about it. If we're looking at remote learning and your students are engaged in some hands-on activities at home, right, rather than just having to scan something and send it to you, you can have them create something, photograph it or video it, and put it up into their portfolio in this way, giving you the opportunity to analyze it after the fact, right? So anytime, anywhere. Now, that's still a lot to write though, right? Like if you're thinking, okay, but Laura, we've got like 30 students in our class. If I'm a grade 12 student, I'm a teacher, I may have 4 classes of science classes and 30 kids in each class. Like this is crazy. This is too much. Yep, that's a lot of work. So portfolios can also give you the option to add a curriculum standard to it. Okay, so if I look here, you can see in the background, I have a picture of Briley's work. She has written on the board her answer to something. So any place, anytime, right? I snapped a picture of it. You can see my analysis is so much shorter, right? Because I've included the curriculum expectation. And for me, and I know Reggio friends, ouch, it's not at all the beauty that is Reggio. It isn't Reggio. Okay, it's documentation in a different way of thinking, right? And so in a grade 5 classroom, right? And so I've got my curriculum expectation attached there, which is my professional analysis of what I'm seeing. And so then I've included there the next steps for the student as well, okay? But if you choose, it could get even better than that, okay? I don't even have to transcribe the conversation if I don't want to. I can just actually record it. And I know you're going like, what? So what? You just walk around recording everything? Yes, I do. That's a practice that comes from the early years, and I'd be happy to share with you. But I record as I sit down with a child, I record. And then if it's no good, I just hit delete, right? If it's good, it's ready to go in real time up into that portfolio. And I'm no longer transcribing. If I've added parents to see the portfolio, I can include, if I've given them the option, sorry, to see the portfolio, I can include that in there. I can add the curriculum standards, you can see there, and then I can even create folders as I would have in a traditional paper pencil portfolio, okay? And so that means that one piece of evidence that I add can go into multiple folders, right? And that's the same for students. If I have a student working in a group of 3, I can put those 3, I can tag those 3 students so that it files into their individual portfolios. So all that work spent on the traditional portfolio, filing, photocopying, because this is both language and science, and I need a copy in both, right? No longer. This does it for me, quick and efficient, right? Okay. Here's an example of a time where I didn't have time. Okay. And so what I did was I transcribed the conversation because I didn't have my iPad on fast enough to grab it. And then quite honestly, it was a crazy day. I didn't get to do my full analysis, but at the click of a button, I can quickly add in the curriculum expectations. And there is somewhat of an analysis, right? A parent, myself, my administrator can look and see and say, oh, yeah. So in this conversation, they were sorting out living and non-living things. Yes, I see what she's saying there, right? So that in itself, really quick to happen, okay? You also, in this one, okay, as I mentioned, you can file things into different folders. So when it comes to reporting time, all of that evidence isn't lost because it's not just a big stream, right? And I don't have to go through a binder looking for the evidence. I want to report on a particular expectation. I find it in the curriculum tracking feature. I click on it and all 6 pieces there, if I'm looking at Andrew's name and collecting, organizing, displaying, all 6 pieces of evidence are going to come up. So when I create his report card, it's no longer going to be a cookie cutter cut and paste report card. I now have a specific example for this student of when he demonstrated that skill, right? It warms the heart of your administrator and your students, and man, do you feel like you know your students well. But it gets even better, okay? If you're in an older grade, there are digital tools out there, digital portfolio tools that will do your analysis for you, okay? In this digital portfolio, they provide the analysis to give you a mean, median, and mode. So I don't even need to, so based on the formative assessment pieces that I have, and because this particular digital portfolio allows you to include as well rubrics, checklists, all of those pieces of things that you might need in an older grade, okay, and to capture that and analyze it, it's going to provide for you your mean, median, and mode to help with your grading. Okay, so all that said and done, when we come back to that original piece of documentation that I showed you, okay, here it is, same thing, Boys at the Credit River, but look how richer it is. Okay, my analysis is there, but I could also have included the actual voice of the child. How beautiful is that? Right? Customizable folders. So I'm slotting it into more than one folder at a time because this piece of evidence showcases several different contents and skills. Okay. Curriculum expectations are tagged because I'm accountable as a teacher and it supports my reporting with the tracking tools that it has. Photo captured anywhere, anytime by teacher, student, or parent, if you ask. Okay. And an ongoing interactive conversation. So no longer is the portfolio a noun, it is a living, breathing document until the end of time. Sure. Okay. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to share with you today. But before I do, let's just sum up here. Okay. I want to be clear that the digital portfolio, I hope that by the end of this presentation, you recognize that it is not taking time away from our learning. Instead, it is actually allowing our students to develop their skills, those higher order cognitive skills that we need them to develop for the 21st century workforce. Okay, they're analyzing, they're evaluating, they're creating. Okay, and if we scaffold the process properly across all grade levels, right? And when I say that, I mean we have to be intentional and purposeful about it. Okay, if we do that, then it can become a more rich, formative practice, and our students are effectively engaged in those higher order cognitive skills, ready for the 21st century, ready to go. And that's everything that I had to share with you today. As your questions and your comments have been coming up down the side, it's been so hard not to get distracted. I'm really eager to answer some of your questions and hear some of your ideas today.
Wow, Laura, you did not disappoint. That was amazing. Great job doing that. Guys, good news. The EdWeb team has told me that since we had such a positive reception, such positive feedback and comments, that we're okay to go over a few minutes today.
Ooh.
So for those of you who want to stick around, because there have been some great questions, we're going to jump into that. Just before we jump into the Q&A, I mentioned at the very start of this that we're doing a little bit of a giveaway to help make you all masters of documentation in your classroom and to make it that much easier for you to be able to support the documentation of learning anywhere, anytime, whether it's you as a teacher or empowering your students to do the same thing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly talk about Spaces and the giveaway. And then for those of you who want to stick around for the Q&A, we'll have a few minutes to do that. So here we go. I'm going to quickly just share my screen. Okay, guys, so I'm going to jump right into it because the Q&A is going to be the best part. But again, I want to let you all know how you can win this amazing book and some other little giveaways that we're doing as well. Honestly, guys, I live in this world of documentation. I know, Laura, I still found myself taking lots of notes. So Laura, kudos to you. Thank you for that. Everyone really enjoyed this presentation. Now, the time that everybody's been waiting for, of course, it's a message from the sponsor, right? But hold up, because this is one that you're going to actually want to listen to. As part of our launch year, we have some fun giveaways for you guys who are listening live and those of you who are watching the recording, which is great. But I'm sure at this point we're all wondering, well, what is this Spaces thing? Who is this My Blueprint? And those are fair questions, right? 99% of you have never heard of Spaces or My Blueprint before, so some background context would probably be helpful. As an FYI, we're new to education. We're just new to you, right? So the Coles Notes, like Laura, we're Canadian. We got started about 15 years ago. It was a research project at the time. Over 1 million students use our Canadian programs every year with over 400 centralized district licenses. We're bootstrapped and we're cash flow positive. Now that last part, it's important, especially this year. You don't want to get halfway into the school year, excited about a product, just to find out that the company had to lay off their whole team and now you're SOL, right? So all of this is to say that we have the flexibility and the runway to use this upcoming school year as our launch year, where we can afford to give away this new Spaces product for free so that we can worry less about finances and more about feedback, your feedback, the type of feedback that's going to help shape the future of student communicated learning. A future where learning doesn't end when the assignment is submitted, which is actually a great segue because now you know a bit more about who we are at My Blueprint, but what is Spaces, right? Well, Spaces tells a story about why students are so much more than the grades on their report card. It's where students receive real-time feedback to support in the moment learning. Spaces is where students, families, and teachers work collaboratively to support this hybrid model of anytime, anywhere learning. Maybe you prefer comparisons. Google Classroom, that's where Jimmy hands in his assignment. Spaces is where Jimmy reflects on his growth. Or the report card, that's where parents get an answer to how did Jimmy do on his test. Spaces is where parents get an answer to what did Jimmy learn at school today. Or if you prefer something a little bit more flashy, Spaces is a student-driven digital portfolio built for 2020. That's the vision. Anyways, we need your help to get there, your feedback. We want Spaces to be able to do everything that Laura just talked about and more. It's a brand new product, so it still has a little way to go before it gets there, but it's well on its way. Actually, you can download the app on your phone right now and see for yourself. It's well on its way because all our team has been focused on for these past few months is listening and learning from people just like you, teachers, principals, system leaders, and most importantly, students, all in an effort to help us understand how each of you are preparing for a new reality this fall, a reality that's going to need to support a model of anytime, anywhere learning. So my question to you guys, do you want to come along for the ride? Okay, great. I thought you would. Well, to say thanks in advance for all of the helpful feedback that you're going to share along the way, and to help you and your students become masters of documentation, we're going to give away 5 of these books. This is the book that Laura was referencing during her presentation. On top of that, we're also giving away 50 free for life pro Spaces accounts when they launch next year. So combined, that's over $5,000 in giveaways, right? Now, how do you win? That's also a great question. Well, following us on Twitter, that won't hurt your chances, right? But what you really want to do is you want to head over to SpacesEDU.com/edweb. Just like you see it on the screen, don't include the www. By leaving your email, you're going to be joining our community of forward-thinking educators like Laura, who are excited about what documentation can do to support anytime, anywhere learning this year. So that was our little spiel. Guys, again, SpacesEDU.com/edweb. We're going to have a lot of great content, including all the stuff that Laura's been talking about. Hopefully we can tap back into Laura's brain to continue to share a bit more of that to help each of you learn about how to make your students masters of documentation. So now we're going to go into the Q&A part of it. So I'm going to jump into the questions. And wow, we got a lot of them. So I'm going to pick some at random here, guys. These were all fantastic questions. Again, if you head over to spacesedu.com/edweb, this is the kind of content that we're creating to answer these types of questions. But while we have Laura live, let's tap into her brain. So here's one. Do students determine the pieces that go in the portfolio, specifically at the upper grade, middle school, high school? What do you think about that one, Laura?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Yes, they should. They should always have a voice in that, right? And so, can you hear me, Damien? I'm just making sure.
No,
yeah.
You're
Okay,
great.
sorry. So again, I come back to that gradual release of responsibility, right? So in our early years, absolutely, our students are selecting what goes in, but teachers are selecting as well, right? And it's possible at that time that the teacher selected pieces are perhaps more reflective of the growth and development, because oftentimes it's in the early years, it's a student selecting something that's just the tallest building he's ever made, and therefore, and the reflection isn't as rich, right? But with the scaffolding, with the development and a gradual release of responsibility over time, it would be my hope that in a grade 12 classroom that the majority of pieces are coming from the student themselves and being put in. So anywhere along the middle, it's that partnership, right? Right up until the end. But again, the teacher voice is never moot. Right? The teacher voice is so important, because we're really that driving force. And, if the student puts this in the portfolio, we want to be encouraging that, pushing them to think forward, right? So great. So you've achieved this. What's next for you?
So a great point. And to your point earlier that you made, every school, every classroom is a little bit different. The teacher might be doing a lot of the documentation. As they get older, it might be a lot of the students as well. So it's whatever works for your class. Now, this next question.
If I can say, the beautiful thing about the digital portfolio is that parents can add things as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes there's things that a student might not think to add, something that they're doing at home, sometimes some community service and things like that the student may not think to add. So, so wonderful when you can have a parent voice in there as well. Sorry, Damien.
No, that was a huge point. And that's something that has been echoed a lot, especially these last few months, is that teachers are looking for a way to, speaking of parents, is create a conversation or create a community when they might not necessarily have that in-person opportunity like we're all used to. So this question is near and dear to my heart, because it's kind of my nexus, or our nexus statement, the whole idea behind why I love portfolios so much. What can you suggest to help promote portfolios in a system that values high stakes testing as a demonstration of student learning? Often in that environment, it can feel like portfolios aren't valued.
It's really that shift in thinking, right? And that's the reason why I started as here today by talking about 21st century skills. Right. So I know that wasn't what you came here to hear about today, but you needed to understand that in order to understand the importance of the formative assessment and portfolio assessment documentation, et cetera. Right. And so I think really being an advocate in your school, working to educate your colleagues and your administration on that 21st century research that is out there, and our responsibility as a teacher to meet our students there and ensure that we are developing those skills. I know that the standardized testing is out of your hands, right? But I think that that's the best thing you can do, is just keep fighting the fight.
100%. And it may not be the best advice for every school. You guys know your administrators better than others, but not just in work and life. I'm a big believer of taking big swings, right? Going for it, right? So if you can show your administrator the proof is in the pudding. Here's the portfolio. Here's all the amazing things that my students were able to learn as a result of documentation. Here's all the pieces of assessment and how it tracked our curriculum standards. They're going to get it, but sometimes it's easier for them to see it than just to hear about it, right?
And I think too that even with a assessment. And here, sorry, is a bit where my ignorance comes in, being in Canada and where we're not having as much standardized testing as in the States. If the students have access to, if they receive their grades, if they have, if there's an opportunity for them to review their work, we can then review that with them and really look at it through the lens of a growth mindset, right? So not focus on that final score, but the assessment itself could be included in their portfolio as evidence of their growth or as evidence of something that they need to work on as a next step, right? So it's really about shifting our way of thinking and looking at it through a different lens. And that might be really important for the mentality of our students who are facing those standardized assessments, right? To be able to set more realistic goals for themselves, where they're improving in increments and celebrating those small successes.
I love it. Yeah. Here's another big one that's near and dear to my heart. So in developing the portfolio, students should collect their best works and reflect on what they did. Should they also include their worst works?
Absolutely. Yes, because you have to see where you came from in order to identify where you've arrived at, right? Although I never believe we've arrived. There's always further to go, right? So definitely they should be including, I don't know if I would say their worst works, but identifying things based on specific criteria, right? And sometimes that criteria is, I did this piece of work and there's a particular part of it that I really want to grow in. And so it may not be the big and best thing because that's the area that they want to grow, right? So that's in the portfolio and the reflection focuses on that, right? My vision for this piece of work was far better, and I think that I need to develop these skills, and here's how I'm going to do that. And then 3 months later, they include something else in a similar vein, and you see the growth there, right? And what a reason to celebrate.
Boom. Yeah. Okay. So here's one. All of this sounds like rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. It's wonderful. Get started with documentation in the classroom, right? What about this one? Have you ever had issues with parents posting negative comments in their child's portfolio? How have you handled parent feedback in that respect?
Very rarely. And as parents, they're usually well-intentioned comments, right? So they don't have the training that we as educators have. So typically in most digital portfolios, you do have the control to delete comments if it warranted that, although I'm sure that would then warrant a conversation with the parents. So I think it comes back to your classroom culture and the modeling that you're setting for parents. Perhaps there's a gradual release of responsibility you want to include there, where you are first the teacher providing the comments, and then slowly but surely you add in the parents after they've seen the type of comment that you include underneath a student's work, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's very clear, that one.
I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to that question, but it's a great answer for sure. So
thanks,
I'm going to I'm going to say this, guys, we're already 15 minutes over. So thank you to the EdWeb team for letting us go over. No, they said it was great because of the engagement and the types of comments and questions people are asking. I do want to give Laura a shout out. Some people use the Q&A to say nice things instead of questions, which was fantastic. That was incredible. I could listen to you all day. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. We had one saying, I'd like to know if I can use this webinar for PD at my district and school. Absolutely. Right. So these were fantastic. Again, I want to thank Laura. I want to thank the EdWeb team. I want to thank everyone who came out today to learn a bit more. And, one more little plug for Spaces. It's a brand new product. We're really excited to incorporate the feedback that we've been receiving from people like Laura and educators who we've been working with for years in the hopes that we can make this documentation a much more pronounced part of this new world that we're living in. So on that note, EdWeb team, I think this is a good place, if any, to wrap up and say thank you for everyone for coming out today, and have a wonderful week.